Good afternoon. It is 3 o'clock. I'm going to call the meeting of the December 16th, 2020 Urban Design Commission to order. My name is Lee Peoples. I'm the chair of the commission. I'd like to go over the public meeting guidelines for in-person meetings during the COVID pandemic. Masks are required throughout City Hall and during public meetings. To enter City Hall, you must use the south entrance. To exit, you can use the northeast or south entrance. To exit, you'll need to push the green button. As you've noticed, every other pew is taped off. There are only 3 individuals can sit on an open pew. Seating is marked on those pews. Families are allowed to sit together. Accommodations for overflow are in the 3rd floor lobby. Wipes and sanitizers are provided at the podium and at the table outside the chamber. The chamber will be cleaned and sanitized every day. Press box is limited to 7 media members. When called on, applicants and speakers come to the front of the podium to speak, only one person at a time. Speak into the microphone, and I would ask you to kind of give people some room to make it back to their seat before you come up, and just give people some space to pass. If you come to the podium to speak, keep your mask on while speaking. Our capacity in here is 33 people. If we reach this number, there's overflow in the lobby. And if overflow seating is being used, we ask the audience to wait in the lobby for their case to be heard so that applicants can come into the council chambers and leave when review of their case is complete. Failure to comply with the safety requirements may result in a person being denied entry or removed from the chamber or the building. Failure to wear a mask pursuant to city ordinance could result in a person receiving a citation. If you parked in Sheridan Walker Garage north of John Rex Elementary School, staff can give you a validation ticket. The agenda and documents are located on PrimeGov. And if you pull that up, you can click on agenda item and view the documents. And with that, Jennifer, would you please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Peoples.
Here.
Commissioner Uday. Commissioner Blatt.
Here.
Commissioner Charnenko.
Here.
Commissioner Guillory. Commissioner Holmes. Commissioner Miller.
Here.
Commissioner Nguyen.
Here.
Commissioner Varnum. Mr. Chair, you have quorum.
Thank you. The first item is 2A, approval of the minutes from November 18th, 2020 meeting. Any corrections or motion to approve?
I'll move to approve the meeting minutes. I'll second.
Have a motion and a second. All those in favor, cast your votes. Okay, the minutes are approved. We have no cases withdrawn. We have no continuance requests. We have nothing on the consent docket, so we will move to cases for individual consideration. The first one is item 6A, UDCA-20-23, 1520 Northwest 23rd. Staff, would you give us an introduction, please?
Commission approved back on August 26th. And you may recall there was an issue with respect to the improvements that were required for the approval of the project that were being placed in the right-of-way of the alley that exists to the south side of this project. We provided you a lot of the detailed documentation of that approval, but that's all been approved already. What's back before you today is a request from the applicant to eliminate that condition with regard to the vacation of the alley. At this time, they have building permits pending for initiation of the project. Those permits are being upheld at this point in time due to this condition of approval because they have not provided the documentation for the vacation of the alley. They've explained the applicant has explained to us that they're reticent, for whatever reason, to go through the process of formalizing and completing the vacation of the alley, and therefore, to avoid being held up any further on their building permits, their only option is to request that the commission remove that condition of approval relevant to the alley vacation. We've described for you in our staff report the reasons that staff believes that this condition needs to remain. Primarily, it is that even though they could put these improvements in the alley with a revocable permit, If those improvements were, for whatever reason in the future, to be removed because of a city action to reestablish the alley, those required elements of the project, including the landscape buffer on the south side and the trash enclosure, would be eliminated, and it would be difficult for us, under the circumstances, to have those features rebuilt on the project site, unless we were to take an action through district court for a violation of the code. They have also indicated to us that if these improvements were removed, that they could come back to the commission and then go on to the Board of Adjustment to request a variance, that they would not have to provide these two features. And we've explained to you in the staff report that we don't believe that, at least at the staff level, we would recommend approval of that variance request. So for that reason, we are recommending the commission retain that condition of approval, and that completes our staff report. We're prepared to respond to any questions the commission may have.
Any questions for staff? Is the applicant present? Okay, if you could come up and give us your name and address, please.
Hello, Holly Hunt with Sam Gresham Architects at 400 Northwest 23rd Street. Let me just. So I would just say my client who will be doing the development, he is not the property owner. I'm sure you've all been made aware. So in order to do this project, it's, we originally thought, sure, we can vacate the alley, but obviously incurring legal action and getting the property owner involved to that degree wasn't something viable for us any longer. So at that point, I got back with Michael. He described what would need to happen to get that condition removed. So here we are. But I will say, sorry, it's really hard to breathe in this and talk.
Yeah, take your time, please. I appreciate you keeping your mask on.
I appreciate that. Okay. Point being, we hope to move forward with the project. We went through several different versions of the site plan, and we're able to, even in the event that in the very unlikely event that this alleyway was to be reopened, we could still provide a landscape buffer on that existing site. Of course, it just means losing more parking. Again, we know 23rd Street corridor has a lack of parking, even though, so again, like, we can feel like we can do that, but we want to focus on the fact that this alleyway is not only very unlikely to be reopened, but it's been this way for such a long time that even some of the other properties on this block, they've extended their buildings into the alleyway. So we're talking about a major, like, what if situation where you're asking people to tear down portions of their building to reopen this alleyway. And I've got an aerial here that shows that. But again, since then, we've moved the dumpster enclosure out of the alleyway and onto our inside of our property line in the parking lot. We just kind of reconfigured that. So now, basically what we're asking to do in this alleyway is merely remediate soil from current existing paving back to earth and provide this landscape buffer. We feel, and we also submitted, I spoke with Thad in the planning department, and he seemed to feel like as long as we could be approved at the building department, which we have, we went ahead and submitted this for a permit with the CA with the condition. And Thad seemed to feel that if a revocable permit would be granted, if we submitted for one and it was granted, that these improvements that alone, it allows us to do these improvements in the public right-of-way, or just like they would in a right-of-way, but in the alleyway. So we feel like, we also have, it's been brought to our attention that the previous proposal that was granted a CA, it's maybe 2 years ago. They submitted this without a landscape buffer and were approved. And I'm not trying to say that, point fingers or whatever, but again, I feel like we're doing everything we can to provide a project that beautifies the area and provides a nice amount of parking for the business without going to this extra step and getting the property owner involved at this juncture just to, again, remediate existing paving back to some soil and grass. We were granted that revocable permit. I brought it with me today. So not only does the city not oppose these improvements in the alleyway, but the site utilities companies also have written back or provided us with letters of no objection. So all that being said, my client, Zach Basher, he represents the company that will be doing the work. So I'd like to bring him up here in case I've forgotten to mention anything, but I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
Any questions?
You mentioned that the dumpster enclosure is relocated. Where is it in the most recent scheme?
It will be in just the southeast corner of the existing parking lot.
Okay.
But we will just put it inside the property line.
Okay, so the 21 parking spaces will be reduced to
18.
18.
And 18 is actually the amount that is required by the zoning ordinance.
So the additional 6 are in excess of the ordinance?
I don't think we have 6 more. We have 21, so we have an extra
Oh, okay,
3.
so I see, you have 21, including the 6 that are, okay, I understand.
Right. You're fine.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Did you want to have your client speak as well?
Hello, my name is Zach Basher. My address is 3600 Northwest 20th Street here in Oklahoma City. My comments are simple. We are really excited about this project. We're excited about the neighborhood, and we're looking forward to sort of elevating this, what has been a dilapidated space for some decades now. The key component here, and it's not that Holly didn't mention it, but the piece that really jumped out to me is, and let me be clear, I'm not familiar with all of the various rules, regulations, legislations, and so on, and I know it's a very convoluted system, and there are many details that I could simply overlook. But being very familiar with both the property owner and the project manager from their project 2 years ago, the gentleman, Scott Boyd, and the property owner presented me with a document in the early stages of this ongoings with the UDC that was from 1926, and it's been stamped by the county clerk's office. And an excerpt from that document reads, "Be it ordained by the Board of Commissioners of the City of Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, that the alley in Block 11, University Edition of the City of Oklahoma, be at the same time, and the same is hereby annulled, vacated, and discontinued." Again, I'm not an attorney. I read that language and it sounds very favorable for me. But why I bring that up is because this was the document that was sort of the linchpin or the key component for approval in the last project. And so I'm trying to understand, and maybe someone can help me understand how that's no longer applicable or what may have changed.
Well, the staff report has some information on there. I certainly will let staff speak to that, but it says it's never been formally vacated, so maybe the staff could give us some more
Well, I'm going to
info on that.
first speak to the project 2 years ago,
Okay.
and I'm going to be very blunt. This issue was missed 2 years ago, unfortunately, and I'm glad that that project didn't go through because we would have had a problem. Secondarily, with respect to the document from 1926 that Mr. Basher is referencing, we've provided a copy of that to the municipal counselor's office, and it's our understanding that the word vacated in 1926 does not mean vacated as it does today. And that's why there's still a formal process through the court system that has to be done to formally vacate the alley. So that document get you part way to where you have to be, but not all the way, and that's why we've made the condition of approval.
Yes, back in the 1926s, that was what they were really doing, was closing, in our opinion, was closing that, because there's still language, in the second paragraph that says the city has the right to come back in and reopen that up. So since the city, that's kind of basically a closing ordinance and not really vacating, since we still have the right to come back through and reopen it at any point.
Sure.
Anyone have any questions? Okay, thank you, sir. And I believe there are two people that have signed up to speak on item 6. There's several items under 6. But if any of you want to speak to this item, could you come up now? Aaliyah Walker. Please give us your name and address when you get to the microphone.
All right, my name is Jacob Levicki, and then my address is 4100 North Drexel Boulevard. So I understand that I signed up for this specific item, but I'm here to talk about an issue that has not been addressed by this board in any form. So today I wanted to let you guys know that I'm here with my fellow citizens to demand that this commission use its full and entire power to stand against gentrification in Oklahoma City. Because unless you've been living under a rock, it is easy
Okay,
to
sir,
understand.
Sir, there is time, possibly later in the agenda for this, but this is not.
That's okay. This is
this
really
is not
important.
related to this
Unfortunately, this is leading to the loss of lives and hunger and unprotection of safety. So I'm going to go ahead and give this speech because you all have been complacent.
Staff, could you please turn off the microphone? We have another person signed up to speak, Zach Brasher.
So I'm going to go ahead and give my speech from back here because I'm not going to sit here and deal with a board that is not open to protecting Black and brown citizens. So my speech is basically that we are living in a city where Black and brown citizens have to see people who look like them be slotted on the streets and government that is not even empathetic enough to sit down with the grieving families. They would rather misportray and try and criminalize the victims. So I'm here to talk about how you, as the Urban Design Planning Commission, have the legal and financial power to stand up for marginalized communities, yet you're not doing that.
Sir,
I shouldn't have to be here in the first place. I shouldn't have to be here. If you're upset that I'm here, you could have taken proactive measures to make sure I didn't have to be here. So the problem is...
Sir, I would encourage you to do this at the city council meeting where there is time for citizens to speak.
There is always a time for citizens to speak because we are paying your checks. Anyone who's in this room is benefiting from our tax dollars. So we're not going to sit here complacently as you are and let our tax dollars go to...
And then...
systematically racist issues with our communities. There are food deserts that are specific.
Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to stop, and if you don't, I'll have the officers remove you.
Okay, well, basically, there are food deserts that are in lower income and communities of color, and this is violent to the health and security of Black and brown citizens. There are food oases, which are in predominantly higher income neighborhoods with less people of color, and that is blatant racism and a threat to the lives of Black and brown people. So as the Urban Planning Commission, I went to Plan OKC and I researched your plan, and there is not a single page that is dedicating to getting rid of food deserts and making sure that all citizens, poor, Black, brown, whatever marginalized person they are, there is no plan in your all's 100-page plan to deal with this, and that is unacceptable. Our taxpayer dollars are not supposed to be going to a complacent system that doesn't care about our lives. So if you're upset that I am here, take some time in your 100-page plan to directly look at the issues of food insecurity and violence to predominantly colored neighborhoods and make sure that all people are given a fair share and fair access to food, health, and security. So you all might not think that we know who you are.
Officers, could you please remove this gentleman?
No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. We're not good. So justice is one. We will be back. I think it's
Okay, are there any members of the public that would like to speak directly to this project? Commissioners, do you have any comments about the project? Yeah, go ahead.
Out to OG&E and a lot of other companies. What about the neighborhood associations in the neighboring districts? Have you been able to reach out to some of them to see?
He was asking if you've reached out to any neighbors and the 23rd Street Association.
I have not, no. As if to find out whether anyone would be in support or.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think it would be pretty safe to venture as a guess that the property owners that are adjacent would appreciate the development of a site that has sat vacant for a long time. It's not safe. It's fenced. I mean, we've been in this process now for almost 6 months. And again, all we're trying, I understand the legality issues, just so you all know, and you know, it's kind of like this. I'm hoping we can find a loophole with the revocable permit through the Oklahoma City office that allows for these improvements and doesn't obstruct our ability to develop this property merely because of a what if that is very, again, incredibly unlikely and would mean the destruction of buildings on the block as well as, you know, tearing up every single residential property along the block as well. And again, I want to point out that these improvements that we're making do not impede the city's ability to reopen. And at that time, this project would be looked at much differently. You know, adjustments would have to be made to our site plan anyway. At that time, we would seek a new building permit. And at that time, we would be brought back into compliance with any and all of the zoning ordinance. So again, I just want us to see this as an opportunity to still beautify the property and to finish this building as it should be, without having us to go through all of these steps and get the property involved in something that she'd rather not do at this time, especially given that everyone else on the block is already using the alleyway and have been for decades. So again, all we're asking to do is tear up some really old asphalt and put in a beautiful landscape buffer. So that's what we're here to do. Thanks.
Thank you.
Michael, if the alley was put back into, if it was turned back to an alley, what would the action be of the city? What would the request be? Obviously, we'd have revocable permits, but we wouldn't have any actually built elements. It would only be a landscape buffer. Would the city at that point require that a 5-foot buffer be put and then the paved edge would be adjusted? Is that what the remedy would be?
The only, as I understand it, the only action that the city would have would be to remove the physical improvements that are in the alleyway that could not cause those improvements to be rebuilt on private property.
I'm sorry, Holly Hunt again. But again, in that event, every property owner, or any of these properties, if they want to do improvements on their site, they have to go through the same process we've done to get these permits, right? And to have that zoning and code compliance review by these professionals. So at that time, every property owner would have to be brought into compliance as well.
What I'm saying is, can it be a condition of this approval that in the event the owner shall? No? Is it something that it could be a condition of this approval that in the event that the alley was put back into service, that the owner shall make the improvements on the property?
I think you could do that. I don't know how enforceable that would be, though. I mean,
Okay.
If I may, in that event, we would have to change our curb cuts, the way that the driveway enters from McKinley. So again, we would be forced to get a building permit in order to make those changes, and therefore would be forced to come back into compliance with the landscape buffer. So in that unlikely event, these things would happen by the nature of itself.
Do we have the authority to approve this without getting this parcel vacated?
We're really just removing the condition, correct? Because it's already been approved.
So you're still,
The project's been approved.
I mean, it seems like it's outside of our jurisdiction, for lack of a better term. Is it something that just needs to go to the city? And then if they
What we've
approve it,
done.
then we would decide whether we want it landscaped or not.
From my understanding, it's a matter of them not complying with the zoning code because they didn't have enough room on their property to do it. But if they got a revocable permit, I mean, I guess now that the dumpster's not in there, I guess if they got a revocable permit, I don't know if that would solve that issue.
The applicant has provided to me a conceptual plan that does show the landscape buffer and the trash enclosure on their own property. We have not reviewed it in detail, but it looks promising. So we think it's physically possible to do it and still have enough parking stalls on the site to do it. But I've also suggested to them that if they want to do that, they could do that through an administrative revision, submit that plan to us, and if it stands up to code, we would approve it administratively at the staff level.
But again, I want to point out that you're preventing this property from utilizing the same alleyway that everyone else on the block is using because of this document. And you're right, Mr. Ternecco, it is really just this legal issue that the term vacation has changed since the 20s so that this closed alley needs to go through one more legal step in order for us to call it our property, okay? Incurring legal fees for the property owner as well as increased property taxes, okay? Because she would enlarge her property. So that's not advantageous for us to do. However, a revocable permit allows for improvements such as landscaping to go into public lands owned by the city of Oklahoma City. So with this document, it proves that the city and all, whoever's in charge of that, the planning department, they have granted us the right to develop this alleyway just as it is, without the extra step. So I think, again, we're getting hung up on the fact that even though it's a closed alley, there may be this alternate future where we're going to reopen this alleyway and, chop up everybody's properties. And as unlikely as that is, what we're saying is what we are trying to achieve with this project will not prevent that from happening in the future, in that unlikely future. So all we need to do is just get this condition removed. And then, again, this revocable permit allows us to do those improvements.
Thank you. If
again-
we have other questions, we'll.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I know that, from my perspective, we have required vacation of alleys. It's pretty frequent with projects, especially in the urban core. And I don't remember anything exactly like this coming up in the past, but we certainly have required this. And, I remember applicants agreeing to it and going ahead. I don't know that I recall anybody in this particular situation or anybody refusing to do it. So you do have an issue of fairness to people that have gone through the process and done everything correctly that we've required them to do in the past.
I just want to make note that while reopening the alley to make it an alley again is probably quite unlikely because as the applicant noted, structures have been built out into that space. The city can also use alleys that have not yet been vacated to go through and dig up and do utility work, which we've seen all along this alley, south of 23rd Street in other locations, both in UD and Mesta Park. And if they do that, they remove whatever has been installed in that alley, and then it's, to some degree, the property owner's responsibility to put it back or to relocate it. So I think that's more of the concern than that the city's going to decide that this should be a functioning alley again, is that something would be installed here and then removed because of some sort of work done, and not put back.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but
At
this
this
is an
point
important.
in the process, we are sort of having discussion on ourselves. When we're
But I'm just
near
trying
the
to,
end of that,
that's what this is, that we have to obtain letters of no objection from all you in the area. So again, I'm just saying, we have gotten the permission from utilities companies to do these improvements.
So I would just say that as long as there's room on the site to come into compliance at some point, I mean, that was my understanding before, was that there wasn't enough site, so they'd be in violation of you know, these zoning requirements, and they'd have to get variances. But if they have a revocable permit, and then for some reason it's revoked, they could meet those requirements on site, I think that would probably be okay, but.
So in that situation, we would be saying that we would be okay in approving this or removing the restriction contingent upon that plan showing compliance being provided to the city.
Well, or provided they have a revocable permit, and if it was ever revoked, they would need to come into compliance with the zoning code.
Okay.
Because if we go with this idea, they don't have to come back to staff, do they? If we remove the condition?
Right, we remove the condition, but what we're saying is, in the event that the alleyway is ever put back
Okay.
into service, that they have to bring the site into compliance fully as a condition of ours.
So that would, if we went that way, it would be on their paperwork, their certificate of approval from us, and if it ever happened, we'd have that to remind us of what happened.
It sounds great on paper. Implementation could become difficult.
Right.
I don't really take exception to the fact that we're putting in, you know, we're not building in the alleyway. This isn't something where we're doing infrastructure that would cause an issue. Yes, it would, in the event that landscaping is removed as a part of a utility effort, that it would have to be replaced by the, all things would have, the alleyway, the landscaping associated with the buffer in the alleyway would have to be kept in fully intact. You know, with the conditions that we're discussing, I don't have an issue with this. But I'd love to hear if there's comments.
It seems like you've seen plans with the dumpster relocated. Should we just push this off a month and get those plans resubmitted?
That's what I would recommend. I'm sure that's not what the applicant wants to hear.
Understood.
They've already been delayed probably more than 3 months as it is. It depends on how they want to build it. If they want to build it as it's been approved, then there's only one way to do that, and that's to either vacate the alley or, with a condition, if the commission is interested in pursuing this avenue, with condition that basically swaps out the condition that's there now and says, oh, here's a new condition to replace that. It says, if the improvements in the alley are limited by virtue of a revocable permit, that the applicant shall make those improvements that are removed from the alley on their own private property. That's an option that that the commission could take today without waiting a month to do it.
So the
Now,
revocable
like I said,
permit-
the plan that I have seen does show the trash enclosure on the private property. It does show the landscape buffer on the private property, and it does show the exact number of stalls that are required, which is 18 for this size of building. So on those three key criteria, it would meet code.
Okay.
But what we're discussing right now is the trash enclosure on private property, but the landscape buffer in the alleyway, is the way that I'm understanding it's
No,
being.
both the trash enclosure and the buffer are in the alley right now.
So if the trash enclosure, if the commission acted in a manner that allowed the landscape buffer only to be in the alleyway, but required that the trash enclosure not be in the alleyway, could that be back for administrative approval?
Well, you could, but we'd still have the landscape buffer improvements in the public right-of-way.
I understand.
In
I
a
do
right-of-way
understand
that should be vacated before that's done, right?
Any further discussion?
I guess where I'm confused is with the revocable permit. So I'm confused as to, they went out and got a revocable permit that allowed them to have the dumpster there, and it allowed them to put the landscape there as well.
Right.
Okay.
That revocable permit was not routed through our department, and it would have been stopped if it had been.
Okay, all right, got it.
But I would add that it's not uncommon to give revocable permits for fences and things like that in the right-of-way. I mean, we have done that before in the city. But my concern was, like I say, just that they would be able to have that, be able to put that on their site, because my understanding was that there was not enough room on the site to put those improvements, and then therefore they would be in violation of the ordinance at that point if they were not able to do that, if for some reason it got revoked.
The building does not change locations though, right?
The building footprint in the plan that I've seen, the conceptual plan that I've seen stays right where it's at. And there's still enough room behind it to squeeze this stuff in.
I understand. Okay.
Any additional discussion or potential motion on this?
I'll draft a motion that we approve the application on the basis that the project meets the regulations and guidelines of the Urban Design Overlay District Zoning Ordinance as referenced in section C and D of the staff report, with the condition that the applicant shall remove the dumpster enclosure from the vacated alley, and that only landscaping improvements and the 6-foot site-proof fence remain in the alley, and that in the event that the alley is ever put back into service, that the applicant shall make modifications to the property to be in full compliance with all the ordinances.
Okay, we have a motion. Any discussion? Any second for the motion? I don't know, is staff pulling up the, are you able to?
Is that clarify, I would clarify that also if the revocable permit was ever revoked, is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yes.
So as phrased, I would second that motion.
You have the option on your screen
I
to,
do not.
you might look through the
Got it.
tabs.
I got it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Okay, we have a motion and we have a second. Cast your votes, please. All right, with that condition, it passed. Next item is item 6B, UDCA 20-33, 718 North Lee. And we'll
Mr. Chair,
start with,
this item is...
staff. We'll start with staff giving an introduction, and
Sure.
then we can hear from the applicant.
Mr. Chairman, this item is a proposal to demolish an existing residential structure at 718 North Lee Avenue. and replace it with a new 3-story structure, residential, on the same site. We've provided for you a detailed analysis of the guidelines that apply to demolition in this part of town, the Cottage District, and provided some assessment for you of our consideration of the building design, the building form, the urban character, the significance of the building, along with the structural integrity and the replacement structure. This may seem familiar to you. It's a lot like a project that the Commission saw about 2 months ago on Northwest 8th Street, and therefore you're seeing the same type of recommendation. It's kind of a split based on what the Commission sees as whether or not the project is a historical or architectural resource, whether or not the project is a threat to public health or safety, and whether or not the project as it stands has a viable economic use. The applicant has provided voluminous amount of documentation regarding the inspections that have been made on the existing structure. They cited deficiencies with the siding, the roofing, the foundation, and many other features in the building, indicating that it's basically too cost prohibitive to bring those features back up to code with the current structure as it is. And therefore, they've requested the demolition of the structure and construction of the new project. So we've kind of given you our assessment and the staff report of what we feel the significance of the building is and whether or not it's salvageable or not. It's really up to the Commission to decide whether or not they feel it's a historic or architectural resource and whether it can be salvaged or whether it's acceptable to demolish it and replace it with a new structure. So that completes our comments, and I'm prepared to respond to any questions the Commission may have.
Any questions for staff? Okay, if the applicant's present, if you'd like to speak, please come up and give us your name and address.
Good afternoon. My name's Veronica Galavie, 718 North Lee Avenue. And I am here today to humbly request permission to demo my existing home as it has served its purpose until now. I've had several problems with the home. I've lived there for 6 years, and I've maintained it the best I can. As you can tell, I've replaced those wooden posts as the original ones it had were rotten out, just as the rest of the siding on there. We've painted it, and some of that has also rotten out, and I've had to replace, so I stopped painting it because it's the same problem over and over. And I'm just here today to see if you guys will approve the demo and construction of a new 3-story home.
Any questions for the applicant? I would have a couple questions for you. The staff report notes you haven't put in any economic data relative to the costs of conserving or rehabilitating. I'm assuming that based on the problems that are noted in here that that's not something you want to pursue.
Right.
Yeah. I live in the Cottage District. I've seen us preserve structures very similar to this. There's one on 816 North Francis that's at the end of the alley and Francis. I do think that one was probably in better shape than yours, and I know that some new windows had been put into that. I know that some of the posts and things were original, I believe, and we we looked at that and denied a request to make it much bigger. We're going to add on to that. And then the one on 8th Street that I think is a great example of how to take an old structure like that, rehabilitate it, and I believe they're going to have some commercial tenants in there as well. That's been a very, very long process for them, and you know, I do believe I can support this. I would like to see us, with the relatively small number of these remaining, I believe the staff report notes like 28 maybe, you know, take a real hard look at these in the future. I appreciate you giving the documentation. That is very helpful to us. But I'd like to hear if anybody else has any other comments. Any members of the public here that would like to speak to this? Any other discussion among the commission? Any motions?
I motion that we should go ahead and determine the existing structure is not a historical and architectural resource, does pose a threat to public health or safety, and does not have
Would
a
you move
viable-
your microphone up? Like it's, I think the masks make it really hard to hear.
Okay. I move that we go ahead and approve the application on the basis that the project meets the regulation and guidelines of the Downtown Design District zoning ordinance as referenced in section C and D of the staff report.
All right, if you can, you should have a button on your screen to formally move that.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, cast your votes. And you are approved.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good luck. Moving on to other business, item 7A, we have a presentation about the Urban Conservation District from staff.
So I'll just stay up here, if that's okay, and present. I'm just going to go through this pretty quickly. This is just to kind of refresh everyone's memory for those of you that were on the commission several years ago and give you a little bit of an update on the status of this. It was presented to the Planning Commission Urban Development Committee last week, and they voted to schedule it for introduction at Planning Commission in March. That was to allow some time for additional outreach to Planning Commission members and to stakeholders that had concerns about some manners of the overlay, and just to make sure we get as much feedback as we can before it goes forward for formal introduction. But I'll go through what this tool was, and then happy to answer any questions if you all have them now, or if you have time to take a look at it, you know, over the next days and weeks, and if you have questions that come up. So this was presented and was being reviewed about 2 years ago. It was put on hold because of the code update kind of launching, but as we've seen some other matters with the code update, like the sign code that you heard about from Lisa last month, we know that some of those code update actions that would affect neighborhoods such as this tool is intended to address may take longer than we initially anticipated. There's been ongoing interest from neighborhoods and renewed interest from members of City Council, so that's prompted us to start taking this back through the process and attempt to get it implemented more quickly instead of waiting for the code update. We have noticed that as revitalization and infill development continues to occur in many of our established core neighborhoods, we hear requests for an enhanced level of design review from some of those areas that would ensure greater compatibility as that development and revitalization occurs, while still allowing flexibility greater than what we might see in a historic preservation district or some of our other established design districts. This started out as a new zoning tool that was going to be the traditional neighborhood overlay. Next slide. As we developed that, though, we also were evaluating our existing urban conservation district overlay and realized that there were a lot of similarities between the two. We have not used the urban conservation district overlay in many years, partly because each one of those was crafted individually and they're very difficult to administer and to enforce. So ultimately we decided that we would shape the traditional neighborhood overlay components into an amendment to the urban conservation district overlay. Existing urban conservation districts, and some examples of those are Gatewood, Linwood, Cleveland, Silver Lake, Mayfair Heights. Some of our HP districts also have urban conservation district overlays. That we would incorporate the provisions of the traditional neighborhood overlay into the urban conservation districts for any new districts to be created, while retaining the existing provisions, guidelines, regulations for the existing urban conservation districts, essentially grandfathering those in. So this overlay establishes a set of design guidelines and a design review process where they would need a certificate of approval either from planning department staff or for very few items from the Urban Design Commission for work only that requires a building permit, exterior work. For a neighborhood to become a new urban conservation district, that would be the standard zoning process that they would go through. It could either be initiated by City Council, by the Planning Commission, or by the Urban Design Commission, or by an application submitted by a group of property owners. Those property owners would need to define the boundary of the area that they wanted to rezone and show support of at least 50% of the property owners within that boundary to initiate the rezoning process. Even if they're able to initiate that, it still would ultimately be up to this body and Planning Commission to recommend, and then City Council to ultimately adopt the zoning. So as you can see, we've been working on this for several years, took a break in 2018, and now are going back through this process to see if we can get this tool completed. So really quickly, I'm going to run through what the ordinance actually proposes, and then can answer any questions you might have. So we are just amending the existing ordinance within the existing format for the urban conservation district. As I said, it adds design guidelines and a design review process for new districts, and then makes clear the provisions that remain in place for existing urban conservation districts. It establishes a purpose and intent to facilitate growth and revitalization while providing oversight for major projects that could impact a district's physical character. It is an overlay, so it applies in addition to any base zoning, and it does not regulate use. Changes to the base zoning would still go through the regular process for things like variances, SPUDs, special exceptions, etc. It requires a certificate of approval only for work that is exterior work and that also requires a building permit. It exempts several things from review and allows for staff approval for the vast majority of items. So this would be limited to major projects, additions, demolition, new construction, and in some cases those items would come to the Urban Design Commission, but again the vast majority could be approved by staff. It establishes guidelines for different categories of work, just like we have in our other design districts, for changes to existing buildings and for work to construct new buildings, infill construction. The focus is on things like massing, form, setbacks, and ensuring compatibility through the overall shape and size and placement of structures. It encourages compatible design for new construction without replicating or mimicking existing buildings. And then it also includes guidelines that address principles for design of buildings for which there are no comparable reference points in a district, such as adding multifamily or commercial properties in a neighborhood where there no longer are any of those. The guidelines emphasize compatibility in things like building orientation, placement of doors and windows, proportion and scale. The bottom picture is a little exaggerated, but that is a real building. But the top picture is a property here in Oklahoma City. So those are the kind of things that we heard from residents that were coming up as things that people felt did not fit well within some of these identified, some of the areas that were expressing interest in this tool. It identifies things like setback, massing, size, and scale as important characteristics for compatibility. And then it also includes criteria for review of demolition that are virtually identical to the criteria that this body uses. And then finally lays out the retention of the existing process provisions, regulations for previously existing urban conservation districts. So we will likely come back before this body either after we have introed this to planning, well, prior to introing this to planning commission, we would come back for an actual recommendation. You may hear from us again even prior to that if there are any significant changes to this tool. But this is to present it, reintroduce it to you all, refresh, and then we would ultimately come back to get a recommendation. Then it would go on to planning commission and then city council. After that, individual neighborhoods could request to zone in to this tool. So even if this gets all the way through and is adopted, it would not be in effect anywhere in the city until a neighborhood went through the next steps of applying to have the overlay. That concludes my presentation. Does anyone have questions?
Thank you very much. We'll
Thanks.
see you maybe next year, early next year on this. Moving on down the agenda, item 8A1, just administrative approval there for your review. 8B, do we have any comments from planning staff?
Nothing to report.
Okay. 8C, comments from commissioners. I would like to make a comment about the protesters that were speaking. Clearly they wanted to make a speech and didn't really want to engage in discussion. But I thought it was interesting that they mentioned food deserts. And I just want to state on the record that earlier this year, this commission did consider and approve a grocery store for Lincoln that is specifically designed to remedy a food desert. And also on our agenda, we have never had a time for public comment. I wanted to keep our business moving along, and that's why I directed them to attend a meeting where comments are allowed from the public, like City Council, where they have time for citizens to be heard. Any other comments from commissioners?
I'll just note that the Historic Preservation Commission does have citizens to be heard on their agenda, so that may be something that we want to consider. There could be a time that people have valid comments for this body that are not, I mean, you all cover a huge area of the city, and there may be times that someone wants to bring something forward. So that's something that staff can evaluate.
Yeah, I think it's something we want to consider pretty seriously. If we do that, then we create a public forum, and we couldn't restrict, people coming in and talking. But something we could certainly consider maybe at our next workshop or something like that.
I think they may just have wanted an audience, but they may also not have fully understood what this body does. And if we have the ability to follow up with any of them that contacted us about speaking, and if they're willing to discuss that, we could perhaps provide them with some further direction on who really can better address those issues than this body can.
Thank you. I do have their, at least one of their phone numbers, so I could share that. Any other comments? Okay, our next meeting will be Wednesday, January 27th. New applications were to be received by 4 p.m. December 22nd, and revisions by December 29th. With that, we are adjourned.